true home. One of the things that really struck me when I first discovered my first Unity book, Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady, at age 16, was the feeling of having come home. And I didn't really describe it that way. I didn't know how to describe it. I just knew it felt very familiar. When I read the pages of that book, it felt very familiar, and yet I had never read anything quite like it. But it was the feeling of something that had been lost and now was found. And again, none of this went through my thinking process. It just felt like I found something that was real. And I knew it was real, and nobody could convince me otherwise. Not that I was arguing with anybody at the time, but it was an experience like I'd never had, and yet how can you have an experience you've never had that feels so familiar? A number of years later, I went to Unity Village to attend classes there when they were offering classes way back at that time, and again felt like I'd come home stepping on that campus. Several of you have been there. You described the same thing. It's so common that Unity has written pamphlets and even book chapters about it. That feeling of coming home, they tried to capitalize on that actually. You've come home, and through their advertising, which is nice, because I could totally relate to it, and a lot of people can. It's something that people say in that community over and over again. You hear that. It's a universal response. And it's like one of the things that really struck me, and again, I didn't analyze it this way, but it was logical. A spiritual message that was logical. That is, the head and the heart work together. So much of the type of religion that I grew up in, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, is it runs on emotion. And much of that emotion is fear and relief. You're afraid, and you're told that here's a way to not be afraid. You can be saved, and that's a relief. It's emotion. But the logic side of it is a little difficult, because here we're saying that if I don't walk this particular path, that I will go to hell, and yet I'm told that God is love. So how can that be? How could a God of love send me to hell because I don't adopt a particular way of thinking? A God of love would open the gates for me no matter what I thought. That's love. Love does not condemn in the way we normally think. The judgmental God that we've been given, is that a God of love? It's not. We love our pets. Sometimes they will scratch or bite you. Does that change how you feel about them overall? How many of you have cats? How many of you talk to your cat? How many of you explain things to your cat? You need help. Well, I tried that for about the first 6 months, explaining things to my cat. But my cat will do things I don't really want it to do. It's gotten into the habit of waking me up about 3, sitting on my chest. But I don't condemn my cat for doing that. I say, that's my cat. I'm glad she likes me. I've explained to her I don't really care for that, and I thought I needed help. because you can't explain things to animals. I used to have a dog when I was growing up that would chase cars, Poochie, and even worse, he would chase the train. We had a train that came through our town, the little town I lived in Missouri, and that dog would get in the middle of the tracks and run straight at that train barking. Had this whiny, weird bark when it was train oriented. It didn't matter how loud he screamed at Poochie. He'd jump off at the 5 feet in front of the train. Just terrorize us every time. And I tried to explain to Poochie, there are some negative consequences if you don't get off in time. But Poochie didn't care what I said. But there's a communication that occurs between us and our pets, between us and all things. And particularly between ourselves and God. And that's the feeling of coming home, I think, that I experienced, is that there is this relationship going on all the time, this communication. It's going on all the time, and yet we're at the surface of life. We're up here someplace, and it's down here at the soul level, at the gut level. Not emotion necessarily, not emotion as we think of emotion. We don't want to get emotion mixed up with the feeling nature. Emotion is feeling, but have you ever seen somebody emotionally out of control? Have you been out of control emotionally? I have. And that has nothing to do with spiritual communication. And we see a lot of that on the political scene. We see a lot of that on the national news scene. There's so much emotion going around. People are doing some weird things because they're following uncontrollable emotion. And we kind of need to settle down, need to take a little bit of a more logical approach about things, calm down. We're a long way yet nationally from finding what I'm talking about today, but you can take a pretty sane person and they can lose it pretty easily if they get angry. And it's all of us have done that. We've been down that road. We know what it's like, and we go explode on something and say that wasn't me later. But it's in there. It's part of us. But we're not talking about emotion. We're talking about a deep feeling that God is not a thing to be feared. When the Bible talks about fearing God, it really means a deep reverence, an understanding of this deeper reality as the ultimate thing that I am to open my mind to. It's a reverence. And you cannot revere a concept. And you cannot revere a God that will throw you in hell for eternity for not going along with some plan that people have come up with. All religion is built by people. You know that, don't you? Every Bible was written by a people. You know that, don't you? You know how many translations of the Bible there are? I don't know. I counted 60-some one time. Go online and just do a research on how many translations are there. So which one is right? They will say different things because they're translated in different ways that go back to the Aramaic or the Greek or the Hebrew, whatever section they're in. And you can translate, just like if I say, do you see that tree? That means something different than, do you see what I mean? Same word, see. Completely different meaning. And that's one of the problems with translation. But the originals, we don't have the originals. Anything as close to the originals as we have is a language we do not speak. There are scholars that speak them, but they argue over what is the best way to say. And I like the New English Bible. I like the Revised Standard Version of the Bible. But I understand there are translational errors in all of them. They say in King James there's something upward to 20,000 translational errors. And that's, so what? That's not God. That's the word of man, the word of human beings. And there's some good stuff in there. And I don't want to minimize that. There's some wonderful stuff in there. But you don't get the beauty of it until you get how it came about. Stop carrying this myth that God somehow dictated to these people, special people, this word that God is. The word of God is not written, it is a living thing. It is the thing we're talking about today. It's home. It's our spiritual home. So Jesus said, "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And when I read this, I don't think of a man saying this. You'll hear that in the traditional church, come to Jesus. You know, you have a come to Jesus moment. We've all had those, I'm sure. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. Have you ever labored and been heavy laden? And you wanted rest, and you didn't know where to get it? And maybe you picked up a book, you read something, and it relieved your mind for that moment. It made you feel better. So was Jesus there? Who's the me that is speaking here? It's not that man that lived 2,000 years ago. I don't care what they tell you. It's you. Come to yourself. Come to your center. Come to your God. Because the burden that we carry, the labor that we're under, what we're laden with, is mental and emotional baggage. That's why when you read something inspirational, it can relieve that instantly because it's in you. The burden is in you, as the answer is in you. And what you're doing is you're letting a layer of your consciousness go, at least momentarily, and coming home to your center. You're reconnecting with what is true of you. And I think the thing that, as I've analyzed over the years, what's that feeling of coming home when I went to Unity Village, when I read the first book? It's like you give yourself permission to let go of these outer layers, and you can just be natural. And the more natural you are, the freer you are. The more yourself you are at the deep level, the more free you are. And so he's just saying here, let go, trust. Open yourself to your center. Be still and know. And in that stillness, a power rises in you that changes the behavior, changes your behavior, changes the way you behave. Changes the way you behave emotionally, mentally, physically, everything about it. And the trouble is we live in such a busy society that something's always calling our attention, but it's probably no more busy than any other time. Like, what if you were going to get water for the day and you didn't know if there was a massive cave bear in the vicinity? You think you wouldn't have a little bit of stress? There's all kinds of things that can give stress, and all kinds of things have given stress. So what Jesus is really saying here, he's talking about something we've always done as human beings. We've used our imagination, we've used our minds, this magnificent tool, to create all kinds of problems. And we can employ that same tool to set ourselves free. We come home, we come back to our center. We've been called from the safety of our previous religious indoctrination. How many of you were indoctrinated religiously previously to this exposure, this type of thing? Most of us. I've done that as well. And I have said many times here that it would take a pretty powerful influence to pull most of us out of that. Because in my case, my family was in it. Really, everybody I knew was in it. And so I had to be willing to let go of that, as you did. You don't let go of people. You don't let go of family. You don't let go of anyone in the sense that you leave them behind. But you're not anymore on the spiritual same page as they are. And they don't probably understand exactly what page you are on or what book you're in. And for the most part, that's okay. You go to a family reunion, you just don't talk about religion. That's the best way to solve it. And you certainly don't talk about politics. Sometimes politics is easier to talk about than religion. But we've all been born into something. We're in a culture. I explained again that when we go back to Missouri, and I'm not saying this as a criticism, but the more I go back there and drive through that country, it's like the religious tone. It hangs in the air like humidity. It's very heavy. And I didn't really realize it when I lived there, how strong it was. And it's a good thing if you want that. So I don't condemn it in any way. I just don't subscribe to it anymore. And I can tell the difference between what I would say the pure air of a deeper spirituality and the humidity of a religion. And I know that sounds derogatory, but I gave it up. I walked away. I don't need that anymore. But a lot of people do, and that's okay. Because I think if you think you have sinned and you're going to hell and maybe you don't quite do all the right things, I think you're going to be okay anyway. That's where I've gotten. I've heard people that have adopted the faith I used to have that say if you're not a Christian, you'll go to hell. Do you believe that? First of all, there's no hell. That really shakes them to the boot. There's no doubt in my mind there's no hell. There doesn't need to be. I'm pretty good at making one up myself. It's like, who needs one? But in my thinking, nobody's going to hell. Nobody's so condemned that they're going to hell. And somebody will always say, well, what about Hitler? Either God is love or God is not. They say, the people that have the near-death experience say the greatest condemnation they get when they leave this plane momentarily is from themselves. That this being of light that usually is accompanying them, sometimes they say it's Jesus, sometimes just a being of light. That there's absolutely no condemnation coming from that. It's all from themselves. As their life review goes on, they see everything they did, said, and thought. And they see how it impacted other people, and they just are freaked out. And that is condemnation. But there's no condemnation in the larger sense. It's like, okay, I screwed up, but I'm okay. That's love to me. That's a God of love. They describe that so beautifully, that I'm not condemned by anyone but myself. And that's, that may seem like a way out, and it's, probably kind of is. But don't we do that anyway? Aren't you your worst critic? If you're not, you're probably sociopathic. You can't see, you can't feel, you can't see what you're doing. But if I do something or say something wrong, even if I don't, even if I think maybe I came across in a way, I look at myself and I criticize myself. I don't need a God or anybody else doing it for me. And I do it until I resolve it. But we've all been called from the safety of our previous religious indoctrination. We are guided by a vaguely familiar sensation that we are returning home. Now, why would we leave something that is familiar, that we're born into? That should be home, right? You're born into it. I was raised in a small town, and most people would consider that their hometown. I consider it my hometown, but it's qualified by the word town. It's not my home. It's hometown. There's a difference. That's where I came from. That's where my body lived for many years of its early life. But where am I grounded? Where is my true home? Even there, I remember as a kid feeling there's something missing. Something's missing. I don't know what it is. Something's missing. And it was when I first picked up that book that I found it. At least I was in the ballpark. Whatever that something is, looks sort of like this. Feels like this. This is real. And so that becomes a path. And you look for the next thing that feels that way, that draws you in that sense, that doesn't have to fight to convince you that it's right. And that rightness stops with you. It doesn't mean that if it's right for you, you're going to go out and evangelize and convert everybody else. I tried that too. I thought, everybody ought to get this. How simple. And I told you the story that I gave it to my minister. My Baptist minister said it was the work of the devil. Well, if that's the case, I guess I'm out of here. But you see how the religious thinking put him in that place of judgment. That was the furthest thing from my mind, the work of the devil. He saw it as a trick, the trickster, the great trickster, out there to get your soul. And where he was coming from, he was absolutely right. And I understand that. But it was not right to me. And so I walked away from it. And continued to follow that path. And it's like little signs pop up here and there, along the way. That book was 16 years old. I went to Unity Village at, 1920, I don't know how old it was. There was another sign. And just, that's how it works, it's things along the way. Maybe it was later, I can't remember when it was. Beth and I were married in 1977, and it happened before that, so you do the math, I don't know, I can't do it up here. So we're responding to a deep stirring in the soul. We're seeking a conscious reunion with our spiritual origin. You see, that's what we come to. And I've said, if you look at all your highlights in all your books, your highlights represent your true belief system, not the belief system of the writer. You're responding to them. Something in you is responding to them. They put it in words. They put in words what you have always felt. When I picked up Katie's book and read it, she had put into words something I had felt and I didn't know it. It had not come to the surface of my thinking. And I certainly could not articulate. I have a file of things, I call it spiritual notes or something, spiritual something or other. that I started writing back then on an old Underwood typewriter, the kind that they weigh about 500 pounds. And my grandmother gave it to me. It had a ribbon on it that I think was probably the original. And I got as much ink out of that as I could. And the letters on the page, they're some are high, some are low, some are a little bit blacked out. But I wrote a bunch of stuff, and it's not for publication, not for public consumption. But I was trying to put into words what I was feeling at that time. And I found that fairly recently. And I see what I was trying to say. I can say it much better now. I understand it much better. It's much clearer. But it is interesting how that is, so what is it that is stirring in you that you can't put into words? That's the real, that's the home, that's our home. And it's calling us, E.T., calling from home, I want to go home. That's the prodigal son. He goes out in the far country, and what's he want to do after he has all this hardship, all these problems? He wants to go home. And that's what we want. But home is not on this earth, and yet it's every place. It's every place on this earth, as long as you're home here. As long as you come home to your center. So we're responding to a deep stirring in the soul. We're seeking a conscious reunion with our spiritual origin. And I found this photo of a guy in fog. I like that. Because that's often how it is. Or am I unusual in this respect? You step out of the familiar, and it gets kind of foggy. And yet, can you turn back? Even in those conditions? We think we can. This journey is not without its trials. Life can throw us questions we cannot fully answer. We're often tempted to scurry back to that well-worn path of our old ways. This is kind of a thing we go through, through this whole process. We will revert to the God with skin on. Quite often we'll pray to the God in the sky when we have a problem. But we get to that place where we more quickly return to that inner center. And we say, this is where it is resolved. This is where my home is. It's within me. It's not out there someplace. Because we find that center of power and we come back to it in every place because God is omnipresent. God is not centered anywhere. As it Meister Eckhart said, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Something like that. In other words, wherever I am, God is. We say that every Sunday. So home is wherever I am. Because I'm always in God. So when I'm feeling separate, what's going on? I have strayed in a conscious, emotional way away from that center. And more than likely, when I'm out in that far country, I'll revert to the old freeways, the old theologies. We don't stay there long. That's the good news. You can go back there. And I think every time we go back, we kind of process that again. And we see why we can actually walk away from it. So we don't stay there long. And the fog begins to lift and we begin to see a way through. We're seeking new ways, asking new questions because a broader dimension is opening within us, stirring and prodding us to greater horizons. See, this is a natural thing. Whether you want it to happen or not, it's happening. That's the thing that really, I think I finally got that. Like I thought, I've got to work hard, I've got to read another book, I've got to figure this stuff out. Well, why am I trying to do that? There's something underneath. It's like a volcano that's about to erupt. Just let it alone and it'll do it. If you throw a virgin or two in there, it's not going to stop. It's not going to change. It's going to happen. That's our natural state, is to be aware of God. Be aware that we are living from that home, that center. And we keep coming back to that. And we don't have to force the issue to study. I think it was Ernest Wilson, one of the early Unity ministers, said that most people are overread and underdone. I think that's probably true. The same expansive energy that causes the chick to start pecking at the safety of its shell causes us to tap at the circumscribed parameters of our programmed thinking. We're simply responding to the stirring of the infant. So you think about that. Something as simple as a chick in this shell, suddenly the world is too small. And it is equipped with an egg tooth that allows it to peck out of that shell. So you are too. You're equipped with a mind that will allow you to say, why am I feeling so restricted? What is this? And that mind is capable of opening to the infinite and finding out. You look at the bigger picture, you can tell why you feel stuck. You look at the big picture, then you look at your life, big picture life, and it's because I'm holding on to something and I can let that go. The chick doesn't probably go through that. I don't really know what they go through. I hatched a couple of them when I was growing up and watched all that. It's quite a miraculous thing to watch. Exactly 21 days, the thing starts pecking out. And it knows what to do on the other side as well. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people back in their old way of thinking. What do I do when I get out of the shell? I don't know. Never been there. So we have pecked out of the shell, right? Is there life on the other side? So the next shell we're in, will we remember that? We will, eventually. That's what this whole thing is about. It's not about adding anything new. It's not about adding new information. It's about remembering the truth about who we are. The chick doesn't have to learn anything. The shell opens up, the chick comes out. There's no books in there. How to break out of a shell. YouTube, they don't watch YouTube. I would, but they don't. It's important to seek clarity in what we believe and why we believe it. The closer we come to our spiritual center, the closer we are to God, our true home. And I think that's the last slide, but I didn't put the cue on there. So you got that? Where's home? Even the saying, home is where the heart is. Isn't that true? It's our heart. It's our soul. It's where we are. That's where we're returning. Okay, so I did not give you an A, B, and C, a 1, 2, 3, how to do this. I'm just saying, trust that feeling in yourself that is striving for that broader horizon. Not to add more things, but to be free right where you are. All right, thanks for coming out.
You've been watching a talk presented at the Unity Church of Grand Junction by Reverend Doug Bator. We would like to thank everyone who joined us here today in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado, as well as those of you who are joining us online. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Also, please feel free to share this video with anyone you think might be interested or benefit from this message. If this video brought value to your life, please consider making a donation by clicking the link below to our PayPal donation account. Thanks again so much for watching.